Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us. It's fantastic to have you all here with us this afternoon for this Egis by Interchange webinar, Beyond the Tracks, What's the Cost of True Urban Regeneration? So this afternoon, hopefully we're going to have some insightful and interesting discussion around urban regeneration and how transportation impacts that, in particular the light rail sector. So some of the key themes that we're going to be looking at are the challenges with regards to evaluating transportation projects, how we can better account for long-term benefits, thinking about urban regeneration and the appraisal frameworks, looking at the strategies that we can use to reduce or potentially reallocate some of the major costs and delays that are associated with urban transportation, particularly the utilities, looking how we can learn lessons from other countries, particularly France, again, looking at how they manage that utilities interface with the early collaboration and to understand if there's lessons we can learn in that area, and also looking wider at their integration with transportation and urban regeneration, particularly funding and planning, to understand how we can learn from that. From a business case point of view, we want to understand how the UK can build stronger business cases for light rail and integrate those urban regeneration benefits, and why that sense of permanence that trams can bring is far more beneficial to urban regeneration compared to more flexible modes such as buses. And then finally, thinking about the takeaways, how regional planning bodies in the UK can work together better, aligning transportation regeneration strategies and the practical steps to ensure that light rail can deliver that maximum regeneration improvement that we all need. So I would now like to welcome our speakers. I'll just quickly share a slide. So first of all, if I could welcome Anshaw. If you could tell us in 20 seconds about yourself, please.
Thanks, James. 20 seconds. Yeah, so I'm Anshaw, I'm the Executive Director of Transport for West Midlands, which is what it says there. And I'm responsible for the Transport Authority in the West Midlands for planning, delivering infrastructure and then operating our transport network alongside many different operators in the region.
Fantastic. Thank you. Gautier, if we can hear from you, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm very honored as well. So I'm Gautier Way. I'm from the Lyon Transport Authority, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Project Department. So we are in charge of delivering the projects for the new lines or the extension of existing lines.
And finally, Steve, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi there, I'm Steve Gooding. I'm the director of the RAC Foundation, which is a small independent research charity, and we research matters relating to motoring. But I'm also here, I think, for my past involvement in matters relating to investment appraisal and trams and the like back in the Transport Department.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. So you're all in charge of the view. So if you want the gallery view, please go in there and change that. And also we've got the Q&A function. If you can use that to ask questions as we go, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar once we've been through the questions with the panelists. So without further ado, over to the questions. So I will start with Anne. So thinking about the National Transport Strategy, we'd like to know what opportunities this brings for creating and advancing urban transit projects. How can this strategy help cities unlock the potential of projects like light rail, and what those potential barriers to us delivering that integrated regenerative focused transport?
Okay, so I think a national integrated transport strategy is going to be really quite key, particularly for city regions outside of London. How transport is organised is very, very different. So you've got different transport authorities or different bodies that are responsible for all the different modes that we see. So whether it's the operation of the highway network with our highway authorities or with tram operators, bus operators in a commercial market, and also our rail network as well. And then how you also get to those locations, so key station hubs, you know, this sort of active travel, walking or driving to sort of those locations as well. I think an integrated transport strategy would let us understand the whole picture of transport, and actually we can plan both the infrastructure investment based on what we know growth plans are, so also the alignment of transport strategy alongside planning and spatial planning, but also working with the modes together, how you can plan and build a network that would deliver the best transport system for people to be able to access where they work, where they live, where they go to school, etc. as well. And it also would create sort of those financial efficiencies in terms of an operational side of an integrated network in terms of the services, but also integrated in terms of planning the infrastructure and changes to meet those growth aspirations as well. So I think bringing together it through an integrated focus is going to be absolutely key to the success, particularly of city regions.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Steve, if we could go over to you, it'd be interesting to know what your views are on how national transport policies influence appraisal and investment decisions.
Well, if I might, James, first up, I would like to echo a point that Anne just made about integrated national transport strategy. Of course, we don't know what that's going to look like yet. It's in the formative process, and the government is going through a consultative arrangement. But I think a really important point is it's very easy to think about integration as being within the transport world. So, for example, the obvious example, none of us wants to find that the train timetable and the bus timetable don't fit with each other, so you can't actually make the joined up trips you want to make. But it is so important that the transport agenda is integrated with the wider agenda. And I think the points that Anne was making are key here. Linking transport with spatial planning decisions, thinking about where the transport needs to be to enable other things to happen, is going to be key to making this thing work. Another thing, which is the point you're asking me about, is of course, when we're doing that and we've thought about what those projects are, how then could they best be appraised? How can government decide which ones it wants to back? Where's it going to put its money? Always difficult. I think that something we know that this government is keen to have a look at the appraisal process within the Transport Department. And I think what I'd say, and what many people would say, is, not for the first time, we have to have a bit of a look at the difference between enabling trips to be made, which is one thing, and I think the thing that Anne is inviting us to think about: can people get to work? Can they get to leisure? And can they get to services? And time savings. Can the people who are traveling already maybe shave a few minutes or even a few seconds off their journey? One of those feels like it's more important than the other, and maybe we need to look at whether the appraisal system is really picking that up, and whether it's giving the appropriate regard to mass transit and what we tend to think of, brigade together, the sustainable solutions, whether they're working to generate the trips and support the trips that need to be made, not just in an urban setting, but for all the trips we need to make, whether they're coming across well enough. Because, of course, some of those mean we're not going to travel as fast, some of us, as we might have liked to, but more of us might be able to travel in the round. And that's where I think the debate needs to be had.
Would you suggest that that debate could be had at the moment with the current appraisal mechanisms we've got, that wider societal benefit with the offset against more journeys, against faster journeys?
I think it can be had, and I think it's very important to recognise that whilst the Department for Transport's approach, which it requires authorities like Anne's to fill in and do their calculations in line with their guidance, it is simply putting flesh on the bones of what the Treasury requires. But all of that can be boiled down to a very simple premise, which is, you want to spend a lot of taxpayers' money on something. Have you really thought it through? And when we do all these calculations, we do cost-benefit calculations and all of these other clever things, they are to guide political decision-making. They aren't there to constrain it. The debate can still be had. The cost-benefit calculation, the net present value, all of those things can tell us how the maths works out. But ultimately what we need is, and again, I'll take you back to the point Anne made, if we have a strategy, say, for Greater Manchester, for the Northwest, or if we have one for the West Midlands or wherever it is, into which we can see this project, be it light rail, heavy rail, road building, whatever it is, this is how it fits. This is why it's important. This is why the benefit of doing this stacks up when we're spending, let's face it, your and my money as taxpayers. Then I think it is possible to do that. Whether it's happened historically and whether it's happened enough is a moot point. And I think it's interesting then to look at where the debate should happen. Who should be leading that debate? What we heard when the previous Transport Secretary launched this initiative was a desire for that debate to be led at a much more local level than from her office in Whitehall, which I think is sensible, and which suggests that maybe some of this is going to fall on Anne's shoulders and her colleagues in other bodies to be leading that, because you don't really want the transport network of the West Midlands or Greater Manchester, wherever, to be dictated by somebody who looks remarkably like me sitting in Whitehall. I think you want it to be designed by people who are in the area, who know the pressures, and know the ambitions.
Yeah, just to add to that, James, as well, obviously fairly recent example for us taking a business case on an extension through to our trams system through the Green Book appraisal with colleagues both in MHCLG as it is now, DFT and Treasury to make the case for why we need to invest. And actually the investment was very much also looking at the level of inclusion and also the stimulus, the catalyst for wider growth in that area. The growth plan is currently under development, so it's not yet mature enough for us to be able to add that in and claim all of those social and economic benefits as well. But because it's the catalyst to that being developed, it's something that we've had to really argue in a collaborative way with colleagues in Whitehall to make sure that that case was made very strongly. The purists who are looking at the Green Book appraisal are looking for those journey time savings and those other direct transport benefits, as Steve is suggesting, but where you need to make a different case, that is a little bit more of a challenge in the current system. And of course, us as a combined authority, we are the same as the other combined authorities around the UK, looking at that sort of devolution process. So those decisions being moved from central government through to local combined authorities, through to local government, where those decisions are part of a bigger picture around economic growth, around delivering the housing targets that we have and connecting people sustainably, you know, to all the other things that they do, like I mentioned, education, skills, jobs, leisure, other services. We're able to look more in the round and in that devolution process, be able to make different decisions, but with the guidelines that are in WebTag still being really important, because as Steve says, when we're spending taxpayers' money, we absolutely need to make sure that every penny counts and it will make a difference and improve the lives of the people who live in the region that I'm responsible for delivering transport for, as others across the country as well.
Fantastic. Just like to bring in Gautier at this point and ask for your experience. Obviously, we're discussing in the UK potentially moving from a more national top-down approach to a regional-based approach. Understand how that funding mechanism works and how it worked for Leon and how that's worked to your advantage and maybe not to your advantage. That'd be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what Anne and Steve have said about that, because it introduces very well and it makes reference to the case of France. And what is key, I think, in France regarding the funding of public transport is that at the beginning of the 80s, there was a key law that enabled first the local authorities to be responsible for developing the public transport and for having the authority to launch and to drive the projects. And also, this law gave the ability for the local and the transport authorities to leverage a specific tax, which means that they had the power to do the project, and then they had the funding and the ability to tax, to have a specific tax dedicated to it, dedicated to transport. And that's a very important law. And this tax, to give you some figures, is called the mobility payment, or versement mobility in French. And it's every company that pays it, private or public, and every company that has above 11 employees. And to give you some figures, in Lyon, our budget for the Transport Authority, our annual budget is 1.6 billion euro per year, and this tax funds us for 1/3 of our budget. So it's a huge amount of money that is regular and that allows the funding of all the projects that we are conducting. So this law was very important at the beginning of the 80s to enable all those projects, and in all cities in France, I would say, not specifically Lyon.
Fantastic. Just a question for Steve. Obviously, the way that we're set up in the UK, we have the competing government departments all fighting for that finite pot of money. Is this the best way to look at allocating funding and the best way to recognise benefits, or is this causing some of the issues in getting these infrastructure projects off the ground because we're not looking at the wider societal benefits that a transportation project could bring, as we've said, to education, training, health, etc.?
Well, I think that we could always think of reconstructing Whitehall in different ways and cutting things in different models and reorganising them. And ultimately, whichever model we end up with, we always end up rather regretting that we've got everything over here apart from that, which for some unaccountable reason we've left over there. On specifically, though, on taking decisions, let's remember the Treasury ultimately decides how much money goes into which pocket. So there's a Treasury decision here that it's about right to have this much money being spent on transport capital projects in England. And how should we go about prioritising that? And I think it is entirely possible for the Transport Department, working with bodies like the combined authorities, working with local authorities, working with the subnational transport bodies, to create a process in which there can be a sensible national prioritisation. So it happens within Scotland, happens within Wales, it can happen within England. And in that, there's no good reason why wider societal benefits, indeed, it's actually an imperative. It's in the Green Book that the wider societal benefits and disbenefits of any investment need to be weighed up. Where I think we might see something a bit better is perhaps a better join up between the Transport Department than historically has been the case with the Ministry of Housing, given, and Anne's mentioned this, a particular push on new housing development. Now, I think none of us would deny that we need to have more homes built in this country, absolutely. But when it comes to where and what the layout of those developments should be and how those developments are connected so that the people who are going to live in them have access to jobs and all of the other things, services that Anne's mentioned, that means you need to have the transport thinking done up front. Not just about projects, but about how is this place going to work? And that's why I would support what I was hearing previously, which is a greater sense that this needs to be more of a bottom-up exercise of thinking, what's the ambition for this place? Where's the development going to be? Therefore, where does the transport capital need to be spent? And then, unfortunately, there is always going to be a difficult decision about where in the country the money is, because the amount of money is never infinite. But I think the signals that we're getting is that there is going to be some money, which is welcome, and the government's intent on simplifying planning arrangements so that not only can a decision be taken, but if that gets the correct planning consent, work can proceed swiftly. That's suggesting to me that there is an appetite there for getting on and funding and seeing through some of these important urban schemes.
Does that resonate with your experience, Anne, at the moment? Are we moving towards that bottom-up approach, or?
We definitely are. I mean, one of the game changers for local decisions on transport infrastructure investment has been the sort of creation of what's called the City Regions Sustainable Transport Settlement. So that's money, capital money that's been given to each of the combined authorities and transport authorities to deliver a set of investments around how we're building the capacity or improving existing transport infrastructure as well. And that has been a game game changer in terms of allowing us to develop a longer term programme. That in itself also helps to create local jobs and things, because people who work on that side of it. But the other game changer as well is both for West Midlands and Greater Manchester Combined Authorities, we're part of the Trailblazer Combined Authorities moving into an integrated settlement. So that's where we get one pot of funding from central government, and we are able, within some constraints, we're able to make decisions around transport, housing, skills, economy, net zero, and bring a more holistic plan around how we're doing those things as well. So the transport infrastructure is also being designed around the growth infrastructure, be it housing or employment sites as well. I think the one thing that we're still yet to fix is around revenue funding. That is the issue. So every transport system requires subsidy, whether we like it or not, in order for it to deliver the economic and inclusion and social benefits. We need to make sure that we're funding in the right way the revenue side of transport as well. So that links into the operational services, both on bus and trams and trains, and thinking about how we are making sure that that level of service and the funding that's required in place is actually driving some of those bigger outcomes around connecting people to those opportunities and also to each other as well. So there's work underway on that, and obviously we'll hope in the multi-year settlement that we're hoping to see this summer in June will give us a bit of a long-term plan around what is available there. But just touching back on what Gautier was saying about the local funding, I very often get involved in conversations with central government about, well, this is what we can give to you, but what are you raising locally in order to add the local contribution to these things? So things like mayoral precepts. Each combined authority has actually got some different rules around mayoral precepts. If you introduce a mayoral precept in the West Midlands at the moment, you could not use it for transport, for example. So, we need to address some of those disparities as well as part of that, because the devolution agreement, I think, will address some of those things. And then things like hotel tax or visitor tax and other raising things are also something that we need to have a good debate about, because some of those things are very difficult for local politicians. At the moment, central government are making these decisions, but actually now we're expecting our local politicians to make some decisions about some further taxes that they might introduce on top of an existing national system as well. So there's still quite a way to go in terms of getting to what we're all quite envious about in terms of what Gautier gets locally contributed into his system as well. But it's not just about capital investment, it is about that revenue that supports the levels of service that we can provide on the transport system.
Just one sort of follow-up question on that point is when these strategic decisions are being made, and on the transportation side, you need to select between the different modes of transportation, so whether it's going to be light rail, whether it's going to be bus to help drive that growth. What's your view about the best catalyst for growth when it comes to transportation?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think those decisions historically have been very siloed. So if you ask a rail team what's the best solution, they will tell you it's rail. If you ask a bus team what's the best solution, they will tell you it's bus. Very often, not very often would they turn it around, but actually we just go back to the point that we talked about earlier about an integrated transport strategy means that you can have the right mode serving the right purpose, and if it all works together as part of a network, a local bus network feeding trains and trams for those longer distance journeys, and then local buses serving those more local journeys. How you fit walking, wheeling, cycling into all of that is really important as well, and ultimately how you're reducing dependency on private trips in private cars as well. So you're creating the capacity on the highway network, our transport system can respond to the increasing demand as well. So I think you've got to do all of that planning in an integrated way. And that's one of the things I'm doing here at Transport for West Midlands, is removing some of those barriers and silos and looking at a network of trains, a network of trams, a network of buses, as well as the sort of, the active travel modes, which are bringing the planning around timetables, as Steve mentioned earlier, planning around fare strategies as well, so that we've got the best value for people who are transferring between the different modes in any given journey as well, and how we just make it more accessible to people who live and work in this region.
Right. Going over to you, Gauthier, obviously you've heard quite a lot about the UK challenges and the issues we're facing. It'd be interesting from your perspective, what you think we could learn from the French model and how it's worked in Lyon, and what lessons we could learn and take on board to help us with our urban regeneration and transport integration.
Yeah, I think what Anna said regarding the integration between, and also Steve was explaining that the integration between the spatial planning and the transport and mobility planning is very important. It's in the hand of the local authorities as well in France, and they need to be consistent and coherent by law, the mobility and transport plan and the spatial planning, which are in the hands of the local authorities. So I think it's a key success factor in the plan at the planning stage, that you have consistency between your different strategies. And those strategies need to be also consistent in the long run, in the long term. If you change every 4 or 5 years, given that project developments for transport are quite long, it's 5, 10, 15 years sometimes. If you change strategy every 5 years, then it's going to be difficult to have solid projects and to have success in your projects. So we've been lucky enough in Lyon, for instance, that the transport and mobility plan, the backbone network of metro and trams projects, have been consistent in the last 25 or 30 years, meaning that there are a few changes, adjustments in the spatial planning and transport strategy, but in the last 30 years, the main things have been reaching a consensus between the different politicians, and meaning that when we are developing projects, of course, there are some discussion, but it's the fundamental of the project are not necessarily discussed. They are expected by all parties and all stakeholders, I would say. So I think that's quite important. And definitely also the projects in terms of urban regeneration are leveraging changes. For instance, we have a project where it was an old railway line of 10 kilometers, and it was refurbished into a tram train line. And when it was built 20 years ago, around it was all industries or fields, and the whole urban transformation since then have been happening. So that we've seen on the field and in reality that what had been forecasted with the plans, the transport and the spatial planning plans have been happening on the field, which is quite satisfactory in that sense.
And just with regards to a probably more narrow focus level, obviously Steve's mentioned the significant cost associated with transportation projects, and particularly light rail. And one of the issues that we face in this country is the cost associated with utilities, and the fact that that is borne by the transportation project itself. It would just be interesting to understand your experience and how that's dealt with in France.
It's a big challenge for us as well. Coordination of all the utility provider, make sure that they will do the construction work and the utility diversion before the construction of the tram. It's a huge challenge for us as well. The utility cost accounts for 15 to 20% of our total project costs, which are at the moment 200 or 300 million, depending on the new lines that we are constructing. We have different ways to try to mitigate and to embark them in the project. One of them is to work very closely with the road authority, because the road authority by law has the ability to enforce them to move their network, and also to block the approval for the utility providers when they want to develop their own network. If the road authorities says, no, I don't want you to work at that moment on that road, then it will block their development. So we have a strong cooperation with the road authority in that way. So that's one side, one point. And then we have other possibilities, and we are working with them very much in advance before the project starts, during the studies, the feasibility studies. And we try to make agreements with each utility provider for each project, but also at a global level to have mutual commitments during the studies and during the construction, to make sure that they have commitments, that they have people to respond to, that they will be there on the field when we find unexpected networks or utilities on the ground. So we work a lot with them at the beginning to make sure we have a framework and we have agreements between ourselves to have the reactivity of the utility provider when they will do the utility direction, and when we need them to respect planning. On our side, what we do is that we say that when we have a fixed project, if there are changes in the project, after some time, we will pay for the additional cost for the utility provider. So that's a mutual agreement between ourselves to make sure that we can respect our own constraints on both sides. Our side is being the planning and the schedule, and their side is okay, planning and schedule, but to have to keep control on their budget, I would say.
Just going over to you then, Steve. Do you think there's any scope in the UK for us to change how that cost associated with utilities is borne? At the moment, that's obviously picked up as part of that transportation cost. Do you think there's any appetite to move that over to the utilities company themselves in any way?
I think we're at a time in the UK when utility costs are incredibly sensitive, because many of us are aware the water companies and Thames would be the case in point. Let's just say that they're not in a financially happy position we might like them to be, and yet our requirements of them, with no relation to transport, but our requirements of them are greater, and I think that would militate against the political mood, I would say, being something that in any sense was likely to push up household utility bills. And ultimately, at the end of the day, there are no magic money trees here. Basically, there's money that we pay in taxes, and we give that to the government, and the government doles it out. And there's money we spend on things, like we pay for our electricity and our gas and our broadband, water, sewage, etc. We are the source of the money, whichever channel it goes down. I think, and I'm picking up on the points that Gautier was making there is definitely an issue about the cost of utility works, particularly utility diversions, when it comes to putting in light rail systems in built-up areas, which is why a project was led out of the Transport Department some years ago by the late Steve Berry, looking at, is there some way in the design of these systems that would require less diversion, less intrusion. I think we need to think creatively here about whether we actually need as much utility work as historically has been the case. If we do, I think the point that Gautier mentions is really key, which is it shouldn't surprise us, pardon me, it shouldn't surprise us that the people running our electricity, gas, water services, main priority is electricity, gas and water. And us coming along and wanting them to do things for us because we're doing a transport project is, well, it's an irritation, let's be honest. That said, what we need is to build a sense, and this all comes back to building the sense of a local strategy, that everyone is involved in making a success of a place. And if your logo is on that you're committed to make a success of a place, then your willing cooperation and your active participation in making projects happen will be key to that. And I think we sometimes underestimate the impact that mayors can have, that the chiefs of combined authorities can have in getting the relevant heads of service together and saying, I'm looking at all of you here because here's how we wish this city to work, here's how we wish this conurbation to work, and it's going to require all of you to do something and to cooperate with each other, and I'm going to be calling you to account on that. And every, whatever it is, every month, every 6 months, we'll be getting together in this place, and I'll be making sure that everybody here is cooperating with everybody else to serve the citizens of this city, because that's what you're all trying to do, and that's what your commercial success hinges on, and that's what our success as a city hinges on.
Go to you with that point, and obviously Birmingham's in the middle of delivering more extensions to the tram network, and as a combined authority, you've taken that bold decision to include the regeneration as part of that tram network extension. So just wanted to understand your experience with regards to that and the decisions you've made and the benefits that you've found from doing that.
Well, there's a couple of points. Obviously, on the utilities, they're always the biggest risk on any capital infrastructure project when you're working within the highway. It does come down to good relationships and working with those organisations to make sure it's all sort of like the integration of programming and stuff. Although very cynical, I do think that some of our utility companies wait for us to come along. They can have a good scan of what's in our pipeline and think, well, actually, we don't need to put that in because somebody else is going to pay for that as well. So there are some behaviours maybe that we need to perhaps challenge, but it comes down to building those good relationships and managing the risks with utilities as well, and how they're regulated sometimes actually adds to some of those behaviours that maybe I think both sides would probably want to make good changes around. It is in the interests of how we are making a place great as well. And of course, with our local authorities and our planning authorities, where we're building tram infrastructure on the street, it's also for an opportunity for us not just to put the tarmac down and the rails, but also think about how can we change the nature of that street. So normally, well, within some of the projects that we've done, we've removed other traffic in some locations. We've moved bus networks around. We've put the segregation in for the tram network in some of those locations. But we've also enhanced the public realm as well. So when it comes to comparison of light rail in the West Midlands compared to some other areas, actually, you can't always compare without sort of putting those costs into different buckets and stuff. But working with our planning authorities, we've actually enhanced, you can see the background behind me in terms of where we've actually done the public realm improvements at the same time. And we've done that along everywhere where we've actually constructed the tram on street. And that's helped to just also attract inward investment. It's not just about having a connection to a transport system, it's about providing the better environment, the improvements that attracts inward investors actually to build other things that then adds to the broader outcomes for the economy of our region as well. So working with our planners and our local authorities, we've been quite keen to do that. It's added to the cost of the infrastructure projects themselves, but the outcomes, I think, if we were able to, through the Green Book appraisal, to actually capture all of those outcomes, which we're not always able to do, it's actually attracting more investment as well. I also just wanted to touch on the stuff that Steve said about utilities and looking at different ways in which we can deliver. Of course, we're also pioneering in the West Midlands something called very light rail. So this is a different track form that could take traditional light rail trams, but would also be a much shallower depth as well. But how do we work with the utility companies to not have to move things as well? And we've got some innovation work that's underway, working with our water companies, etc., to look at instrumenting some of these test sites to see whether or not there is an impact or whether they can build something over the top of and leave some things in situ, not everything, but some things in situ, which will help us reduce some of those costs as well. So I think, Steve, that's a watch this space on that one. But again, it will come back to the acceptance of the utility companies about leaving some things in place, and then also thinking about the operation of the tram. Should you need to go and repair those utilities, you've got an impact on the operation of the tram for that period of time as well. So there's loads of things that we're doing, and actually the tram network in the West Midlands is also helping to create great places, and then those great places are also seeing that other wider investment across the region as well, which is helping deliver our economic growth plans.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we're going to go over to some of the questions from the audience. So first of all, this one is from Nicholas Falk. He says, how can the government ensure that strategic housing developments are properly joined up with infrastructure capacity? The answer may lie in using digital intelligence to supplement devolution and to assess the impacts of different scenarios. What can we learn from the French approach to spatial planning at a regional level? So I guess, Gauthier, start with you first on that one.
Yeah, actually we have some modeling about that. we have a unique modeling for the Lyon region, the Lyon metropolitan area, I would say, where we have some inputs from the transport line, and we have the input also of the actual housing, and also for the plans for housing and spatial development for the next 15 years. It's up to 2040. So when we make feasibility studies for new lines or extension of lines, with that model, we try to assess the ridership with regard to the development of new housing or additional capacity of housing in certain areas. So it allows us to have one figure, and I also agree with what Steve was saying earlier. It's about models, it's about figures, it's about socio-economic and environmental assessment, but it's also about politician will, orientation, some people that have the vision for the future. So the model is one thing, but it's only one criteria in choosing whether it's going to be a bus, a tram, a metro, nothing. So, but we have this consistency between the spatial and the transport in a model that allow us to have some figures when we make some feasibility studies. And the model is in cooperation with the metropolitan area of Lyon, the Lyon Transport Authority, the region, and the national government. So it's a partnership model.
Thank you. Okay, next question is from John Parker. So the issues and policy environment are almost exactly the same as the last integrated transport strategy back in 1998. What practical new things should we be doing now that we haven't been doing in the last 26 years? Otherwise, doing the same thing will lead to the same outcomes. Do we need to embrace demand management and funding reform in its widest sense?
Do you want me to pick that one up, James?
Go for it. Yeah, I didn't pick anyone who jumps in.
I have to say, I'll be having words with him later. But I think demand management is something. When I first arrived at the Combined Authority working for Transport for West Midlands, we had a programme of an intense programme of construction, which was set to disrupt the whole of the transport network. So if you think about what National Highways are doing on our local motorways here, you've also got HS2 construction, which is also disrupting the motorway network. We had the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, which I mentioned earlier, which has got over £1 billion worth of investment, plus other things that are happening like utilities, other developments, etc. And actually, if you'd allowed all of that stuff to just happen independently, it would just be chaos on our transport system. It all needs to be really carefully planned. And also, each of those parties needs to have visibility of what each other's plans is. So sort of building that common platform, that common view of all the things that are happening, and then working collaboratively on the mitigation strategies to make sure that we can keep things moving while we're investing in better infrastructure as well. And that does come down to demand management. I think the work that we did, particularly around the Commonwealth Games in 2022, where we planned what the transport system needed to do for all the visitors that were coming to this region, but then also what the background demand was also going to be. We were able to work through how can we get people to travel differently, how can we get them to avoid certain locations, how can we move them and use it as a sort of a catalyst towards behaviour change, to change some of their habits, to use public transport as well. And it worked really well. We've managed to keep some of those habits that some people locally in terms of that background demand needed as well. And that sort of demand management principle of helping to help people shift their behaviours. But that comes with actually providing a decent transport system that people can rely on. It gets them where they want to get to. It gets them there within the time that they're expecting to be able to get there as well. And then that comes back to the question that you asked at the beginning about integration, being able to plan those things in an integrated way, and then also being able to respond to incidents so it can still be relied on as well. In order to get demand management and shift people's behaviours, you need to have the network that people will want to use.
Brilliant, thank you.
I had a thought on that one, James, because I think arguably there's 4 things you need to see through a strategy. So you need the vision of what you're trying to achieve, you need the powers that you need the authority to make things happen, you need the budget, you need the money, the resources to make it happen, and you need time to implement it and see it through. I think one of the others, I think it might have been Anne, was saying, you need to see these things through, not chop and change direction. And I think one of the things we might learn from the 97-98 integrated transport strategy is, let's look back and ask ourselves, did we nationally, did we regionally, did we locally really have the opportunity consistently to see through some of the things that were thought up, that were key parts of that vision at the time? I suspect we'd say not so much. And I think Gautier said, you know, if you're in a world of changing your mind every 4 years, this sits very poorly with major transport capital projects, which routinely take 4 years to get from the drawing board to a spade in the ground. So 4 things then: vision, powers, money, time, key for us. Those are things I think we should think about. That's what could make something different next time.
Brilliant. Probably got time for one last question from the audience then. So Vanessa Urschel has asked, does there need to be a new funding relationship with maintenance/operational funds alongside capital funding? It feels like we are hamstrung in terms of operations at the moment. Do you want to take that one first, Steve?
Sorry, one bit back. What's the specific there?
So do we need a new relationship between funding at the moment, between that maintenance and operational funding?
Yes, sorry.
To CapEx?
Absolutely mission critical. Anne was on this point. So much of the debate at the moment is about the allocation of transport capital, understandably so, and about creating projects. But I also note, and hark back to my past experience here, the government is very keen to support buses and bus networks, understandably so, big fan of buses myself. But if we're not going to provide the resource funding to support those bus services running, then we have to have a reason for thinking they're going to run. If they're going to run commercially, that's one thing, and a lot of our bus networks do run commercially. But we've been round this by a number of times on the railway. If local authorities don't have the resource money to look after, run, operate services, if they don't have the money they need to do the really mundane and boring things that relate to roads, like clearing out the gullies and clearing out the drains so they don't flood in the rain, then we end up with higher costs, we end up with higher capital costs. And that's one of the other areas where we desperately need to see a absolutely join at the hip between the Transport Department in Whitehall and the Ministry of Housing that looks after local government funding in Whitehall to get a grip of that overall picture. And if it's the case that in different places there are different models of what mayors can do and what they can precept and what they can't do, well, maybe we need a bit more attention to what can reasonably be expected to be raised locally to fund the operation of services, not just think about developer contributions as one-offs to build things, but how could we fund the operation of things once they're built?
Yeah, it's absolutely mission critical, as Steve said. There's a couple of things really. Maintenance. So the maintenance of our existing infrastructure alongside the delivery of new infrastructure, actually in places where they're happening at the same place, why aren't you joining those two things up? So you're delivering one scheme, which is also using your financial resources much more efficiently as well, combining, I don't know, a highway maintenance scheme alongside a bus lane scheme, for example. The other side to it as well is that maintenance of things like footways, where you're removing any sort of cracks in the pavement or you're making it smoother, better for walking, and that will deliver a better environment for people to actually do active travel, which is another core policy area, and then connecting people across those things as well. But the biggest thing is around the whole life costing of projects. Having capital to deliver new infrastructure is also adding a financial revenue burden for maintenance. So the whole life costing of projects really needs to be thought about. So it is the time to actually have that conversation alongside, not just building more and adding to something that could potentially be crumbling foundations. We need to make sure that we maintain what we have and we build new stuff on the top of that, and it all works together successfully.
Maybe one clarification, James, here regarding what I was saying previously regarding the tax that is specific to mobility, that is funding 1/3 of our budget. our budget is regarding investment, but also regarding operation and maintenance, meaning that in our budget we are funding one of our main operator regarding operation and maintenance. So the tax is funding the investment costs, but also the operation and maintenance costs.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully I've just got time to ask you all for one kind of final thought, what it is that's giving you hope for the future. So if you 1 minute each, what's making you optimistic about our industry and about that integration and regeneration? So starting with yourself, Steve.
Well, I'm very rarely accused of being optimistic, but I think the fact that the government has kicked off something of a debate about what an integrated national transport strategy should be, and the fact that we're getting, as you have today, drawn out some views here which go way beyond the traditional, as I started with, the traditional, can we line up our bus and train services better, to ask some rather more fundamental questions about what integration means when it comes to thinking about transport in relation to wider strategies, economic strategies, housing strategies, health strategies. That's where the integration needs to be. It needs to be thought about in terms of what those strategies are, what their priorities are, where transport fits within them, how that transport is going to be paid for, and how that transport service is going to be sustained in the future. All of those things, I think, need to be ventilated as part of this exercise. That's what I think gives me hope, because hopefully we'll come up with some really bright ideas for making it better.
Final thought from you?
Well, I just building on what Steve said, actually, integration of transport alongside the integration of what transport enables. So the investment in housing, new employment locations, and how we're sort of sustaining in an inclusive way the economies of our region, and also in a sustainable way as well. I think the fact that these things are starting to align, not just in an integrated transport strategy, but the bringing together of spatial strategies alongside transport as well, and then how particularly combined authorities are starting to see the benefit of that further devolution of powers, responsibilities, integrated funding that allows us to sort of build not just transport stuff, but also what transport enables us to do as well. And for me, that's quite exciting, because that has a positive impact on the people who live in this region by giving them access to all of the opportunities and helping grow some of those opportunities for those people as well.
And then Gautier, last but not least.
Quite optimistic as well, because I see here in this panel and in the discussion that we have that there is a will to anticipate. I think anticipating is key regarding funding, to secure the funding, regarding the challenges that we may face regarding the project, such as the utility diversion. We haven't talked about land acquisition. We haven't talked about the user and public participation, but I think there is a strong will to anticipate that. So I see that you will have a look at those success factors for delivering good projects. I hope for you guys in the UK.
Brilliant. So it's just left to me to first and foremost thank all our panelists this afternoon for giving up the time. There's been some great insights there. I think there's a real sort of sense of positivity with the fact that we're looking at things in an integrated way that opens up a lot of opportunities. We know that there's significant challenges out there at the moment, both in terms of the economy and how we're going to deliver those projects, and also deliver all those other requirements that society is looking for at the moment. So it's great to bring people together, be part of that debate, be part of the start of that debate, and hopefully we can drive things forwards as an industry and as a group. We will be at Interchange, so hopefully we'll get to meet people in person and continue on this debate in the future. And thank you to everyone that's dialed in and taken the time this afternoon. Apologies if we weren't able to answer all your questions. As I said, hopefully we can see you again at Interchange.